Hey y'all, and welcome to Politibrawl. My name is Brian, and Tom Homan snaps at Chris Cuomo when Chris tries to start telling him how the law is supposed to work. Let's dive in.
Why won't you guys turn over the manifest and prove that these are bad guys, that they are who you say they are, not who their family members are saying, that shouldn't have been swept up? They're not gangbangers.
Well, look, we know this. We know that, first of all, we got to figure, Aliens and Enemies Act is clear that through proclamation, the President of the United States invoked his authorities under Aliens and Enemies Act and made it happen. He has the total right to do it. It was a law passed by Congress, signed by a president. It was something that was used. As far as the flight itself, I think there's 263 people on that flight, 2 MS-13 special cases, 21 MS-13 gang members, and 240 trained agua. Now, the information I had is every one of those trained agua, every one of those Venezuelans was a member of that gang. And that's who's on that flight. And President Trump has designated, with the help of the Department of Justice, the Department of Homeland Security, Department of State, has designated Trained Agua as a terrorist organization. So that plane was full of terrorists and MS-13 gang members who are also designated terrorists. That was a plane load of terrorists being deported from the United States for the AEA.
I get it. Look, you're not here to argue the AEA. Let the lawyers take care of it. But that's not all the law qualifies, right? You have to have a declared war. There has to be an active conflict. There are other steps, which is why nobody's ever used this law this way.
Chris, it doesn't have to be.
Let them
it doesn't have to be declared war. The statute also says it's
right
a predatory incursion, in which it's a predatory incursion, though, and that is what occurred. We know that through numerous investigations that the TDA has infiltrated in part of the Maduro regime through the military and law enforcement. They're part of it. So they're not here by accident. They were sent by the regime to destabilize this country, whether it's fentanyl that killed thousands of people, the sex trafficking of women and children, or the violence. So this is the foothold we have on this group, and this is why they're designated terrorist organizations. And TDA is an enemy of this country because of what they've done within this country.
I have no problem with any of that. Make the show of proof that's necessary. The judge will have to be presented with it. You'll win the case if what you're saying is true. But the idea that this was getting held up for judicial scrutiny surprises neither one of us. My concern is that it's not just the bad hombres and that the family members are saying their people aren't in gangs, and because you rushed it, you're now caught having to prove that these people are who you said they were, instead of just using due process, showing the results, proving who they are, and then getting rid of them. Haste makes waste. Fair criticism or no?
I don't think. I made a phone call just this morning. On my way to the White House this morning, I made a phone call to people that are over this operation. I asked them a simple question: were mistakes made or not? Are we sure that every Venezuelan on that flight was a member of TDA? I was told, without any doubt, everyone has been verified as a member of TDA.
Your concern, Chris Cuomo, is that you are wondering whether the due process has actually been done, and that we've done all the research into looking into who needs to be deported, and you're just wanting to make sure that we've crossed our T's and dotted our I's. Yeah, sure. I'm not buying that for a second, buddy. This guy's concern is the fact that the Trump administration has acted swiftly and the mainstream media has been caught flat-footed. And not only has the mainstream media been flat-footed, but legal rights organizations have been caught flat-footed as well. Immigrant advocates sued in order to get these migrants back to U.S. soil, all because they thought that the Alien Enemies Act was being used improperly. Now, as someone who enjoys some legal theory, that's a good thing to sue on, because this act has essentially 2 main parts to it. Number one, and this is where the mainstream media has essentially been telling only half of the truth of the situation. Again, there are 2 ways that this law is enacted. Way number 1 is, if there is an act of war, and that can only be done by Congress, the president can indeed use this law to basically expatriate people and send them back to their home countries and deport them based on the tenets of the Alien Enemies Act. That's part 1. But there's a second part of this law. that a lot of the mainstream media has completely left out, that these immigrant organizations has completely left out, that Boasberg refuses to understand when he tried to get a verbal order to get the planes to turn around and come back to the United States, even though at this point they were over international waters, which again means that it's likely that this verbal order doesn't have any legal weight. So not only is it, are we asking the question that is a verbal order legal, we're now asking, once it's over international waters, do we have the ability to turn that plane around? What is the legal proceedings here? And by the way, Boasberg, who has basically been a swamp creature his whole life, lived his entire life in D.C., was so behind the eight ball on this that he wasn't able to get it in writing, like I said, a verbal order. This dude was completely unprepared. Meanwhile, the president's team, the Trump team, was prepared. Tom Homan was overseeing this and has double-checked his work and claims here in this interview that yes, indeed, all these members are part of Tren Aragua. I have not been pronouncing that correctly. My apologies. So this is part 2 of the law. And that part 2 states that basically if there are any foreign actors who are acting on behalf of their government to make things messy here in the United States, then it doesn't matter if we're at war with them or not, they can be deported under this law. And that is exactly the argument that Tom Homan is making here. Tren de Aragua is basically an acting arm of the Venezuelan government who has been hostile to the United States ever since what was that fat dude's name? Cesar Chavez. All right. Cesar Chavez turned that nation from what should have been the crown jewel of South America and turned it into a socialist nightmare. And remember, Argentina should be the crown jewel, and guess what? They're acting actual conservative and libertarian policies, and their economy is booming. Thanks, my leg. You're doing a fantastic job. Oh, and by the way, also thank you to President of El Salvador, Bukele. Thank you for taking on a whole lot of these criminals and working with the United States. You are doing some fantastic work cleaning up your country of one of its major problems. And there are some people who are not ready for that kind of talk, and shocker, it's probably the mainstream media as well. So the 2 points of the law that Tom Homan is particularly talking about here is not the wartime point that the mainstream media keeps on pointing it out. And as I read article after article, if they're all part of the mainstream, NPR, Washington Post, New York Times, pretty much anyone that's been part of the legacy media, they're screaming about the wartime clause. They aren't talking about the secondary clause that talks about foreign national actors who are working either on behalf of their government or with clandestine orders that we can't directly prove. And see, that's one of the problems with those 4 laws, that the Alien and Sedition Acts were a set of 4 laws, one of which got completely repealed because Thomas Jefferson didn't like how far John Adams was going with the law. And 2 of them ended up expiring. But the one that has stayed on the books has been quite literally there for the American president to protect the American people from foreign actors. And by the way, if we're on the subject of history, at the time there was something called the XYZ affair and the Quasi-War, where we were basically in conflict with France over shipping problems because their revolutionary government wasn't exactly playing nice with everyone, and they wanted to draw the United States into a war, and so they used their own national actors, and finally John Adams and Thomas Jefferson both realized we can't deal with this nonsense. We're trying to deal with a small nation that's trying to get a foothold of itself, and so we started kicking out those nationalists underneath this law. So there is historical precedent. There is a whole another part of this law that the mainstream media is lying about at a constant rate. And Chris Cuomo should be smart enough to look into this, but as Tucker Carlson once pointed out to his face, that Chris Cuomo is just not an inquisitive person. And that's where we need to treat him here. He is not an inquisitive journalist. He was trying earlier this year, but he's fallen back into his old ways. He's backslid. And Tom Homan is simply telling him the reality of the situation. That the United States and the President of the United States can deport foreign nationals if there is even the suspicion of the idea that they are working to undermine the United States as directed by their home government. which there is more than suspicion that this has been happening with Venezuela because the current president, Maduro, is a full-blown dictator who has flaunted elections, does not want to see the West succeed, and is just spiteful for the fact that because of his mismanagement and because of his foul play, we have kept on sanctioning his country. And this is his response. This might as well be an act of war, in my opinion, and I think this law is airtight, and it does not matter what Boasberg wants to get the planes to be turned around or to turn over the information, because the initial lawsuit had everything to do with only half of the law and not the other half. This should be thrown out entirely, but the mainstream media is not going to do its job, and they're going to continue to whip up their side into a frenzy. This is just bad journalism all around. And Chris Cuomo is definitely complacent. And you know what? I think in the long term, so is Boasberg. Folks, my name is Brian. Hope you enjoyed that segment here on Politibrawl. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Catch you on the next one. And until then, y'all have a good one.